The sound of my mother-in-law's hand slamming against the mahogany table was louder than a gunshot. The crystal wine glass she knocked over didn't shatter, but the dark red Merlot surged across the pristine white linen tablecloth, racing toward my lap like a vein being opened. The entire dining room, 12 of the city's most influential socialites, my husband, and his terrifying parents went dead silent. Victoria stood up, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier light, her face twisted in a sneer that she usually reserved for the housekeeping staff. "Enough!" she hissed, her voice trembling with entitlement. "I will not hear another word about this nonsense. You will not finish your master's degree, Elena. We are the vanguards. Married women in this family stay home, raise heirs, and serve their husbands. We do not bury our noses in books like common clerks." My husband, Julian, didn't look at me. He stared at his plate, cowardly and silent, pushing a piece of asparagus with his fork. The cousins at the end of the table snickered behind their napkins. To them, I was just the charity case, the poor girl who trapped their golden boy. I watched the wine drip off the edge of the table, staining the expensive Persian rug. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but my hands remained perfectly steady. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and looked Victoria dead in the eye. "You really shouldn't say that," I whispered, my voice cutting through the silence like a razor. "To someone who is writing a thesis on corporate financial crimes." They paused. Then, the laughter started. It rippled around the table, cruel, dismissive laughter. They thought I was making a joke. They thought I was pathetic. I lowered my glass. And I smiled, because they had no idea who I really was. To understand why I didn't walk out that door immediately, you have to understand where I came from, and the trap I had fallen into. I didn't grow up with silver spoons. I grew up with steam irons and the smell of detergent. My parents ran a small laundry shop in the gritty part of the city. We weren't rich, but we were meticulous. My father taught me bookkeeping before I could ride a bike. "Elena," he would say, pointing at the ledgers, "numbers don't lie. People lie. But if you look close enough, the numbers will always tell on them." I internalized that. I became obsessed with patterns, with accountability. I worked my way through college on scholarships, graduating top of my class in forensic accounting. I was tough, sharp, and ambitious. Then, I met Julian. Julian wasn't like the other wealthy boys at university. He wore thrift store sweaters. He drove a battered Honda. He told me he hated his family's toxic wealth culture. He told me he wanted a simple life. He made me feel like I was the only person who saw the real him. I let my guard down. For the first time in my life, I stopped calculating. One night of trust was all it took. I became pregnant. Julian's mask slipped, just a fraction. He insisted on marriage immediately. "It's the right thing to do," he said. "My parents, they're old-fashioned. We have to move into the estate until the baby is born." I agreed. I thought I was gaining a family. I didn't know I was walking into a prison. The Vanguard estate wasn't a home. It was a museum of ego. From the day I moved in, Victoria took over. "That color washes you out," she'd say, throwing away my favorite sweaters. "We use Dr. Eris, not that clinic you go to," she ordered, canceling my appointments. But the real war was over my education. I was 3 months away from finishing my master's in forensic accounting. It was my dream. It was my ticket to a career at the Financial Crimes Bureau. Victoria saw it as a threat. "A master's degree," she scoffed one morning over breakfast. "Sweetheart, you're a housewife now. Your job is to make sure Julian looks good and the baby is healthy. Why do you need to know about— what is it? Tax law? How boring." I looked to Julian for support. "Julian, we discussed this. I'm almost done." Julian, the man who once claimed to hate his family's pretension, sighed. He was wearing a suit his father bought him, looking more like them every day. "Elena, honestly," he said, his voice cold. "Mom is right. You're stressed. The baby needs you calm. Just let the school thing go. It's not like you're actually going to work, right? My family provides everything." That was the moment the cage door clicked shut. They didn't see me as an intelligent woman. They saw me as a vessel for their grandchild. A servant with a ring. They mocked my background constantly. If I mentioned my parents, the table would go quiet. "Oh, yes, the laundry people," Victoria would say, wrinkling her nose. "I suppose that's why you're so good at folding napkins, Elena." I swallowed the insults. I endured the isolation. I became the invisible wife. But they made a fatal mistake. They assumed that because I was quiet, I was stupid. They assumed that because I was poor, I was powerless. They didn't know that every night, while they slept, I wasn't just crying. I was reading. I was studying. And I was beginning to notice things about the Vanguard lifestyle that didn't add up. The excessive cash tips to delivery drivers. The strange hours Julian's father, Richard, spent in his home office shredding documents. The panic in Victoria's eyes when a registered letter arrived. I was a forensic accountant living inside a crime scene. And they treated me like the furniture. The conflict didn't explode all at once. It was a slow, suffocating burn. As my pregnancy progressed, their cruelty sharpened. I was no longer a guest, I was property. One Sunday, they hosted a brunch for the extended family. Aunt Caroline, a woman with too much plastic surgery and too little empathy, was holding court in the solarium. I walked in to offer a tray of mimosas because Victoria had fired the maid that morning for looking at her wrong and demanded I fill in. "She trapped our boy with that baby," Aunt Caroline muttered loudly to a cousin. I froze. "It's the oldest trick in the book. Find a rich boy, get knocked up, secure the bag. She should be grateful we even let her stay in the guest wing." The cousin giggled. "Well, look at her. She definitely didn't marry him for his conversation skills. Girls like that climb the ladder on their backs." I set the tray down. My hands were shaking. I looked at Julian across the room. He heard them. He had to have heard them. He took a sip of his drink and looked away. That betrayal hurt more than the insults. He wasn't just weak, he was complicit. But the breaking point came 2 weeks later. The dinner. The wine spill. Someone, I suspect one of the younger cousins, had been recording Victoria's meltdown on their phone. They thought it was funny. A Real Housewives moment to share on their private Snapchat story. But the internet is uncontrollable. The video of Victoria slamming her hand, screaming that married women serve their husbands, and me sitting there covered in wine, leaked. It didn't go viral globally, but it spread like wildfire through our local community. To the vanguards, it was a nuisance. To my parents, it was a declaration of war. I was in the nursery, folding baby clothes, when I heard shouting downstairs. Real shouting. Not the passive-aggressive snipes of the wealthy, but the raw, honest anger of working people. I ran to the balcony. My father's battered delivery van was parked right on the manicured lawn, tire tracks deep in the grass. My father stood in the foyer, facing down Richard Vanguard. My mother was right behind him. "Where is she?" my father demanded. "You cannot just barge in here," Richard sputtered, looking around for security. "This is private property." "Our daughter is not your housemaid," my mother screamed, her voice breaking. "We saw the video. We saw how you treat her." Victoria descended the stairs, looking horrified. "Get these people out of here. They are tracking mud on the marble." My father looked up and saw me on the landing. His face softened, then hardened into resolve. "Elena, pack a bag. We're leaving." Julian stepped out of the library. "Now wait a minute. She's my wife. She's carrying my child." My father turned to Julian. He didn't yell. He just looked at him with profound disappointment. "You promised me you'd take care of her. You lied." I looked at Julian. I looked at the marble floors, the chandeliers, the cage. Then I looked at my dad, with his calloused hands and his stained work shirt. I walked down the stairs. I didn't pack a bag. I just walked out the door, got in the van, and never looked back. The relief was instant, but the anger was just beginning to metabolize. Back in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the smell of clean laundry and safety, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to finish what I started. I contacted my university. My professors, who had been baffled by my sudden withdrawal, welcomed me back with open arms. They knew my potential. I needed a topic for my final thesis. Something dense, something complicated, something involving forensic auditing of private equity firms. I sat at my small desk, staring at the wall. I needed a case study. A company that appeared successful on the outside, but showed signs of rot on the inside. A company with a toxic leadership culture, unexplained cash flows, and a sudden desperation for liquidity. I typed Vanguard Holdings into the search bar. It was public record. Their filings were available if you knew where to look and how to read between the lines. I began to dig. And what I found was terrifying. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was a labyrinth. Shell corporations in the Caymans. Consulting fees paid to companies that didn't exist. Fraudulent safety certifications for their construction projects. Massive debts hidden in off-balance sheet vehicles. I worked for 6 months. I gave birth to my son, Leo, and wrote my thesis with him sleeping in a sling on my chest. Every cry he made reminded me of the people who wanted to turn him into a carbon copy of themselves. I wasn't just writing a paper. I was building an indictment. I defended my thesis. I passed with distinction. But I didn't stop there. I sent a copy of my findings sanitized of names but structurally identical to Vanguard Holdings to a contact my professor gave me. A recruiter for the State Financial Crimes Bureau. 3 days later, I was hired as a senior analyst. My first assignment? We have a tip about a major conglomerate, my supervisor said, tossing a file on my desk. Vanguard Holdings. We've been trying to nail them for years, but their books are a mess. We need someone who understands their internal logic. I opened the file. I looked at the name Richard Vanguard at the top. I can handle this, I said, my voice steady. I know exactly where the bodies are buried. The investigation took 4 months. I worked in the shadows. I subpoenaed bank records. I interviewed disgruntled former employees, maids, drivers, junior accountants the Vanguards had fired for incompetence. The picture was complete. They weren't just unethical, they were insolvent. They were funding their lifestyle on stolen tax money and loans they never intended to pay back. Then came the invitation. The Vanguard Group's 40th anniversary gala. They sent it to me as a joke, I suspect. Or perhaps Julian sent it, thinking I might come back crawling if I saw their glory. The card was embossed in gold leaf, celebrating 4 decades of excellence. I RSVP'd. Yes. The night of the gala, I didn't wear the floral pastels Victoria liked. I wore a dress I bought with my own paycheck, a sleek, floor-length black gown. Sharp, architectural, minimalist. I looked like a blade. I walked into the ballroom. The flash of cameras was blinding. The room was filled with politicians, investors, and journalists. This was the night they were supposed to announce their IPO, their plan to go public and cash out before the house of cards collapsed. Victoria spotted me near the champagne tower. She marched over, Julian trailing behind her like a lost puppy. "Elena," she sneered, looking me up and down. "I'm surprised you could afford a dress like that. Did you rent it? Or did your parents sell the laundry van?" Julian looked nervous. "Elena, you look different." "I am different," I said calmly. "I'm finished." "Finished with what?" Victoria laughed. "Your little tantrums." "My education," I said. Before she could respond, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Richard Vanguard walked up to the podium, beaming. He looked like a king. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard boomed into the microphone. "Tonight, we celebrate not just wealth, but integrity. The Vanguard name stands for honesty." Applause rippled through the room. Then, the side doors burst open. It wasn't waiters. It was 6 uniformed officers and a man in a sharp gray suit, the state attorney general. The music stopped. The murmurs began. The attorney general walked up the stairs to the stage. Richard looked confused, then angry. "What is the meaning of this? We are in the middle of a broadcast." The AG took the microphone from Richard's hand. "Mr. Vanguard," the AG said, his voice amplified through the hall. "I'm afraid the celebration is over. We are executing a federal warrant for the seizure of all Vanguard assets and the immediate arrest of the board of directors." The room gasped. A collective intake of breath from 300 people. "On what grounds?" Richard shouted, sweating now. "This is harassment. Who is behind this?" "The grounds are tax evasion, securities fraud, and money laundering," the AG stated. He held up a thick, bound document. "The evidence is irrefutable. It was compiled by our lead forensic analyst." The AG turned and looked directly into the crowd. "Agent Elena Vanguard," he called out. "If you would." The camera crews turned, the spotlight swung around. It landed on me. I stood there, holding my clutch perfectly still. Victoria let out a strangled sound. She grabbed Julian's arm, her nails digging into his suit. "No," she whispered. "No, she's nothing." I walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I saw the fear in their eyes. I saw the realization dawning on Julian's face. I stepped up to the podium, standing next to the Attorney General. I looked at Richard, who was trembling. I looked down at Victoria in the front row, who had collapsed into her chair. "You asked who was behind this," I said into the microphone. My voice was calm, the same voice I used when I whispered at the dinner table a year ago. Julian stood up, his face pale. "Elena, did you do this?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I simply did my job, Julian," I said. "I finished my thesis. And unfortunately for you, your family was the case study." The silence was absolute. Then, the flashing of camera shutters went crazy. The chaos that followed was surgical. "You destroyed us!" Victoria screamed as officers moved in to handcuff Richard. Her composure shattered completely. She lunged toward the stage, but a female officer blocked her path. "You ungrateful little rat. We gave you a home. You destroyed everything." I looked down at her from the stage. "No, Victoria," I said, loud enough for the press to hear. "You destroyed yourselves. You broke the law for 20 years. I just turned on the lights." Julian tried to push through the officers. "Elena, please, think about Leo. Think about our son. You can't send his grandfather to prison." "My son deserves honesty," I replied, cold as ice. "Something your family lacks entirely. I'm doing this for him, so he doesn't grow up thinking he can steal from people and call it business." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Because the arrest happened on live television, the stock market reacted instantly. Vanguard Holdings' value dropped to zero before the markets even opened the next day. Accounts were frozen. The mansion, the cage I had lived in, was seized by the feds. The luxury cars were towed away on flatbeds. The socialites who had laughed at me at that dinner table, they were scrambling to delete photos of themselves with the Vanguards, terrified of being implicated. The court battle was brutal but short. With the mountains of evidence I had compiled, the undeniable trail of numbers, Richard pleaded guilty to avoid a maximum sentence. He got 15 years. Victoria was implicated in wire fraud. She didn't go to prison, but she lost everything. Her reputation, her home, her status. She moved into a small apartment in a neighboring town, ostracized by the society she worshipped. And Julian? He fought for custody of Leo. He tried to paint me as vindictive, as a woman scorned. But the family court judge saw the police reports. He saw the financial instability. He saw the environment Leo would be raised in. I was granted full custody. Julian got supervised visitation. I remember the day the judgment came down. Julian met me in the hallway of the courthouse. He looked tired. His expensive suit was wrinkled. He looked like the boy I met in college, only stripped of the charm. "I really did love you, you know," he said softly. "No, Julian," I said, adjusting my briefcase. "You loved having a fan. You loved having someone to look down on. But you never loved me. Because you never bothered to know me." I turned and walked away, the click of my heels echoing on the marble floor, a sound of victory. 3 years have passed. I finished my PhD last spring. I'm now the director of the Financial Crimes Unit for the district. I live in a modern apartment downtown. It's not a mansion. It doesn't have crystal chandeliers or velvet drapes, but it has huge windows that let in the sunlight. It has warmth. My parents come over every Sunday. My dad teaches Leo how to ride his bike in the park. My mom cooks dinner, and the house smells like spices and love, not floor wax and fear. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my balcony and look at the city skyline. I can see the building that used to house the Vanguard offices. It has a new logo now. The Vanguard name has been erased from the city, scrubbed away like a stain. I think back to that night at the dinner table. The wine spilling, the laughter, the command to stay home and serve. They wanted me to be small. They wanted me to be a footnote in their grand history. But they forgot the most dangerous thing about education. It teaches you how to dismantle things. They wanted me to give up school, but they became the largest chapter of my thesis. I took a sip of my water, looking at the lights. Blood is not family, loyalty is family. And silence? Silence isn't weakness. Silence is just the sound of the weapon loading. Some people only understand loss. I made sure they understood it perfectly.